Guys, welcome to Working Fans Podcast, episode 135. Today, we have a very special guest. But before we get to our guest, you know the intro video.
Are you a fan of pro wrestling, comedy, and combat sports? Then we have the podcast for you because we cover that and much, much more.
Do you like to debate with your friends? Do we have the perfect segment for you? It's the 531, where we take any given subject, break it down to a top 5. From there, we debate it down to 3, and then into that number 1 spot.
If you want to get a hold of us, find us on our social medias. Search Working Fans Podcast on any major social media platform. And if you want to find the podcast, search for us on any major podcast platform, as well as YouTube.
Working Fans Podcast. We put in the work so you don't have to.
Fans, as always, we are brought to you by the Pro Wrestling Vault, Volume 1, written by Vinnie Barry, 35 short stories across the wrestling landscape. Each book comes autographed by one of 11 wrestlers featured in it, available at lancebychance.com, where you can also get Lance by Chance Wrestling is Von Erich. And guys, you know we usually have more reads, but I'm going to bring in the man they call Dave.
Hey.
Bring in Princess Josh. You guys, if you followed us talking about Florida Gulf Coast wrestling, we've got some other things percolating. Princess Josh is featured on those shows. Josh, tell the people about.
Well, recently, Florida Gulf Coast Wrestling did a joint show with Southern Extreme Pro Wrestling, a company where I happen to be the lowly commissioner of. And during that joint show, something had come about where you guys had been brought up about providing some commentary for the show for Florida Gulf Coast Wrestling and subsequent past shows for Southern Extreme Pro Wrestling. So moving forward as the commissioner of Southern Extreme Pro Wrestling, I'm happy to welcome you two individuals on board my team. Not necessarily my team, but at least this team of SXPW as our official commentating team.
Oh, thank you very much.
Pleasure's ours.
We couldn't have a better introduction. Now, for people not familiar with you, tell us about Princess Josh.
Oh, the story and the tales of Princess Josh vastly go through the multiverses, depending on which corner of the multiverse you are in, obviously. I've been known to be a chaos demon, a god of mischief, and a boatload of other things, including a triangle at one point. But those were in other parts of the multiverse. In this part of the multiverse, unfortunately, I am your princess of weird. I am your god of chaos, the supreme leader of Cerise. And to get to this journey, it has been a long and complicated one. I started off in the Black Hills of Rocky Point, which is up in the northern regions of Rhode Island and Taunton, Massachusetts. Somewhere in that vast area is where I grew up. And grew up a lifelong wrestling fan. My uncle was a wrestling fan, and he had shown me professional wrestling at a very young age. So at early ages, always pro wrestling has been there. But the first definitive memory was WrestleMania 3 and getting the Coliseum home video and renting it from my local video store numerous times. And that is what brought me into the world of pro wrestling, watching Andre Hogan. I was an Andre guy. I liked Andre and Bobby, and wanted to see them win that match. I did not want to see Hogan win. And every time I rewatched it, it still boggled my mind that Hogan was able to win that match. But lifelong fandom and a lucky chance happenstance with the owner of Brawl USA, James Legend, and then, of course, my mentor, Simon Says, I was able to get into the back door of professional wrestling.
That's something we always ask people is, we're all fans. We've all been there. How do you make that jump from being a fan to being able to get into the industry?
So for me, it was a unique opportunity because in professional wrestling, as you guys know, it's all about opportunity and what you do with it, right? And that's pretty much life. So for me, I had lucked out. I gotten into indie wrestling hardcore around the 2013 time period is when this all takes place. And the owner of Brawl USA, a guy named James Legend, had messaged me on Facebook and was like, you know, independent wrestling and specifically who Leva Bates is. How do I not know who you are? And I was like, well, I'm just a fan. I work in music and this, that, and the other. And we got a conversation and I saw an opportunity and I was like, hey, if you need anybody to come in and do ring work or, you know, set up any odd job, I will gladly do it. When I was younger, I had tried getting into the professional wrestling business. My father at the time, my stepfather, he wound up bringing me to a wrestling training school for about a month or so. I got to go work a couple shows with them, had an unfortunate circumstance with a fan where I basically yelled at her to sit down. I took away from the match. It was a whole thing, but it was a learning experience. And for a very long time, I took that learning experience as it wasn't meant for me to be in wrestling. So when this opportunity presented itself, I literally grabbed it by the throat and did what I had to.
Nice.
So, and then like my mentor Simon Says, he saw me at that show and saw me like really, I literally was the ring crew. It was me and this old man who had cancer, and that was the whole ring crew. And they saw me literally set up, tear down, help out with anything, and didn't complain, didn't ask for anything. And they were just like, okay. Simon Says looked at me for that and was like, what's your deal? Why are you doing this? And I told him, I'm a fan. I've always wanted to do this. Like, if this is the opportunity I'm given, if this is as far as it goes, this is, you know, at least I can say I did this. He owned a company named Vintage Wrestling at the time. And he was like, come to my shows. No pay, no nothing. It was about a 2-hour drive away. And you come out, you black clothes, everything. Black shirt, black pants, black shoes. We'll have you do security, odd job, set up, tear down, all those things. If you're smart enough, you'll keep your mouth shut, your eyes open, and your ears open, and you'll learn things. And in that locker room, I got to learn from so many guys and got to do so many different things because he wouldn't just like have me do security. Everything set up. Okay, go to the production guys. This dude named Paul, who ran 316 Productions for them. Go learn from them. They're producing the show. Figure out what it takes to run the camera, edit, anything you can learn. He would direct me toward it. And then it all just eventually became parts of the tool belt that I now have.
And that seems like one of the best ways to get into wrestling is be available, be open to whatever, not whatever, but be open to a variety of jobs and just give it your best.
And being able to do it.
Yeah.
Well, I think it comes down to this is, as fans, we all have the grandeur and dream of the main event holding the title in the air as the singles champion, right? Realistically, that's not for everybody. And realistically, this business is a lot bigger than just being in the ring, right? So for me, even growing up as a child and learning, you know, once you got that veil taken off of professional wrestling is a scripted program that is put together by individuals and the whole team and stuff, and starting realizing like, oh, wait a minute, Gorilla Monsoon, Jesse the Body Ventura, they used to wrestle, but now they're doing commentary. But wait a minute, Gorilla also does this. These guys also do this. Jimmy Hart's making the, why is it all this way? And then like one of my favorite guys is Triple H. And one of his things was you can tell a lot by someone by the caliber of wrestler that they're gravitated towards. So what's your top 5? That'll tell you everything you know about the individual, right? That's coming towards you. For me, it's Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, and usually my 5th one will vary. Oh, Taz usually is my big 5th one that I go to because of size and stuff like that. But if you look at the caliber of guys in that roster and stuff, look at what they've done for wrestling. They didn't just do the in-ring work. They did the production. Like, look at everything Triple H has done. Triple H, huge influence for me. Love everything he's done. Like, it was those little things when I was younger that helped me realize, like, I might not be set for in-ring work, but there are other avenues where I might be able to, you know, get my name out there and be a part of wrestling in the thing I love.
Makes sense. Now, we have a fan question, and Randy's a fan of ours, but he's not familiar with it. Who's the favorite wrestler you wrestled? Who's the favorite wrestler you've worked with? I think would be a better.
All right. So, because I've never actually had a match, right? So in my entire 8-year career, I've done a lot of things, but the one thing I've never done is have a match. And that's something I'm very proud of. I've been trained the backdoor way of at shows. Guys would show me things. There have been a few guys. One of them recently passed away, Shooter Storm. Before a show one day, I had to help bring him to a show, and he was like, "Hey, anything you don't know, let me teach you." I'm like, "I don't really know how to bump right now." He taught me basics on how to bump. I wasn't that great at it, but I took that one day learning experience, brought it to another place, and they taught me a little bit more and stuff like that. So that's how I learned a lot of the things I know. So as far as working a match, no. Favorite people I have worked with, the people I work with normally, the members of Cerise. There's Tweedledee, there's the pagan psychopath Sanson, the Emperor of the Wild, Frederick Yeager. They're all men that I very much love and appreciate working for. For some people that you may know, I've gotten to work with Rob Terry. I've gotten to work with Gangrel. One of my favorite people in the world that I've gotten to work backstage with and got to learn a lot from was Tony DeVito from ECW, DeBaldi's, and Ring of Honor. Got to learn a lot from him. Simon Says, obviously, my mentor. I got to learn a lot from him. And then some other guys that maybe you haven't heard of, like Francisco Chiazzo. Everybody now knows him as Frankie Coverdale as part of the Talkin' Shopomania crew. Down here in Florida, we knew him for a long time as the King of the Southeast, Francisco Chiazzo. And he was a guy that taught me a whole bunch. Bruce Santee was another guy. He's done things for ICW No Holds Barred recently with, I believe his name was Justin Steele. He was another big influential guy of like getting to see how he did. Mike Cruz, like I said, these were all guys who came from that vintage locker room. They had gone and done other things, and they had come to this place to make it their own. And unfortunately, that place isn't here anymore, but I took those lessons from there and have applied it there. So there's so many guys that I've gotten to work with over the years that I'm very honored and privileged to get to. Everybody I get to work with, honestly, is an honor and a privilege.
Yeah,
Josh, I'm
you can
curious.
almost learn from anybody you interact with.
Mm-hmm.
Josh, I'm curious. I always tell people sometimes I learn a lot more from mistakes. Is there some stuff you felt like you've really learned through adversity in this business?
Yeah, there's a lot of things, because you know how they say wrestling's for everyone? It isn't. It really isn't, because like the days you have to go out on the road, and like tomorrow I'm literally hitting the road for 6 hours to go work my wonderful home away from home, New Heights Wrestling, my kingdom away from kingdoms. And that's a 6-hour car drive there, a 6-hour car drive back, all in the same day. So, and I can't wait for it, but that's time away from my loved ones. That's time away from my little daughter that is only 4 years old. So and I'm only planning on having one kid. So it's not like, oh, I'll make it up with the next. No, there's none of that for me. So whatever I miss is I miss, right? I've missed Easter this year. I missed Halloween this year, which is a big holiday for me. Obviously, being the Princess of Weird, Halloween would be huge. I was at a show. I hosted Fright Nights in Defuniak, Florida for 7 nights. Unfortunately, I was met to almost a grisly end. Unfortunately, they did not realize the power they were dealing with in Waylon Barley and Shane Gibson, two miserable, unfortunate souls I'm going to have to deal with soon rather than later. But that's another story for another time.
Now, tell us about the indie scene in Florida, because we're getting more familiar with it only because working with different companies, we try and become aware of everyone else. What is it like down there? Because we're in the Northeast, so we've got like Beyond Wrestling is in the Rhode Island, Massachusetts area. Northeast Wrestling is an indie that's out of Connecticut. There's like Paradise Alley Pro Wrestling. So we have a few little
This is one of the things you don't realize, right? There's those big companies that you got, right? That you obviously know because they bring in the bigger talents of the guys you see on the IWTVs, the WWN Live networks, the PWGs, whatever it may be, right? But there are other companies out there beyond those ones, right? All through the corners of the universe and the multiverse and in the United States and the world, there's professional wrestling in size, shape, or form, right? So in Florida, we have over 100 different promotions that range from your biggest of the big to the smallest of the small. I've gotten to work for a lot of different ones in between, right? Because that's kind of how it is when you work in the indie professional wrestling scene. So I know you mentioned Beyond Wrestling. I also know there at one point was a New England Championship Wrestling that I believe is still around and stuff like that. They may have gone through a name change and stuff like that. Hard to follow the scene when you're not in the area. So that's where a lot of people, like when you're a trainer for talking to you and telling you about the world. There used to be the old adage, if you're not trying to make it into WWE, what are you in here for, right? I never subscribed to that. I've always been of the mindset of longevity is the key, right? Because the longer you do this, the more you do this, hopefully the more you learn, the better you get at this and the bigger stages you'll get to perform on, right? So down here, we've got some big stages. We get some companies come down here and stuff like that. So like I just mentioned ICW No Holds Barred. They've come down here and stuff like that. I got to work production for them and do music for them for a few of their shows. Just to Ron Nemi is a good friend of mine. He used to run IPW Hardcore down here in Florida. They used to incorporate guys like AJ Styles and Roderick Strong and all these big indie guys that are now making waves in WWE and AEW long before this, right? This is like 2003, 2009. They gave me footage recently to work on that had Macho Man Randy Savage on it. That is now available on the IWTV feed. That I got to work on that footage. That that's behind the scenes production stuff that people don't realize. One, that I do, or two, that goes into some of this stuff, or who's actually working on stuff. Like if you guys remember being ECW fans, they used to say Tommy Dreamer was the guy sending you the t-shirts. Bubba Ray Dudley was the guy answering the phones. Why was that? Because they didn't have a staff. They have dedicated people to the business and the industry who wanted to see that particular promotion or whatever it may be shine. So you have that down here in Florida. You have that up there up north. You have that all across the United States. So many people working hard to try to make this one little dream an accomplishment, right? And even in the smallest ways, we try to make that happen.
100%. Now, you kind of learned the production side of things from just getting practice in it, right?
A lot of it, yeah. Because like video production and like it doesn't take much to hand out flyers, right? Anybody can do that. It does, old school tactics still work today. I always like to say everybody knows when the circus is in town, right? Right now, when the circus comes to your town, you know about the general time frame because every single store, every single place in your town gets hit up with a circus flyer. Why? Because they travel, because they're not used to your territory or town. They still have to do the old handbill flyer way to make sure everybody knows that the circus is coming to town. They still rely on Facebook, Twitter, everything like that. But unless you're really looking for the circus, you're not finding the circus. They make the circus come to you. So a lot of those little things were what helped me learn. And then from there, it's just like looking over shoulders and seeing how things were done. I've always been big into movie production, movies and film and TV and how all that comes together. So I took some of the things I learned from there. I was like, okay, how can I apply it here, right? If they station a camera here to do a promo, like little things like that. When they say watch footage, for me, watching footage, I'm not necessarily watching how guys do things in the ring. Yes, I am watching that at times to see all of those things, but I'm also watching how many camera cuts are they doing? How did they station the cameras? Especially old wrestling footage when they didn't have as many cameras as they do now, right? Cameras are cheap and easy to make. Everybody's got one in their phone, right? That's one of the hard things about being in video production today, right? You deal with promoters, they'll literally take out their cell phone, like, what can you do that this thing can't? A lot that thing can when you really logistically look at it. All that thing's going to do is film. And then even more so, it's going to film from the perspective of the person's hand you put it in. If they're not filming well, yeah, that's why you get multiple cameras on there, but that costs, right? Because if one of those cameras goes down, you've got to replace it. Company's not going to replace it. They don't care about certain production costs. Look at how they treat microphones, right? Every single wrestling company says, don't throw the microphone. What do you see everybody doing even on the indies? They're tossing those bad boys like they're, paperweights.
Yeah.
Because it's not their property. They don't care about it. They want to be the big badass, right? So, which I get, but as the production guy, you're the guy sitting there figuring out, all right, well, that just cost me X amount of dollars. That just cost me X amount of dollars. All right, well, hopefully I get X amount of dollars to cover this, because if not, that's coming out of my pocket. It's not coming out of anybody else's pocket, right? There's an old adage that I heard Scott Hall say is, how do you make $1 million in professional wrestling?
Ooh, start with $1 million, I would guess.
Start off with $2 million.
Oh,
Because you're going to spend that first $1 million just being in here, right? So then you'll just get dwindled down to a millionaire because you only have 1 million in the bank.
Oh man.
Yeah. Just
Now-
like over the last 24 hours, I've been putting money into getting merchandise made, getting entrance attire made, and all that kind of stuff. That stuff is not cheap.
Yeah,
And then
it's
of
all the
course,
little
normal
costs
family
that
stuff.
happen.
That's why independent wrestling, like, it's a thing of you have to have passion for it.
100%. Now we got another fan question here. What's the most challenging thing about working behind the scenes?
It all depends on which aspect you're behind the scenes, right? Because if you're an announcer, to me, one of the more challenging things as an announcer is making sure you know the material and knowing the guys' names properly, because you don't want to misquote anybody or missay something, because ultimately this is about getting everybody over, right? Because if the guys in the ring aren't getting over and doing their job, the company's not going to get over. Nobody's going to, the fans aren't going to be there. So that's always a challenge. Another thing is talent availability. Nobody ever really takes that into consideration of especially in the COVID times, right? If a guy gets sick, he's got to stay home. You got to now rewrite the entire show to kind of fit that. And that will throw off a lot of different plans that you may have had going into the show, even just as a promo perspective, right? If you're the guy just brought in to shoot the promos and planning on shooting and having material for the next 2 months with one guy and they're not there, how are you going to do that? You would have to you'd have to go meet them somewhere, and now you're eating extra money out of your cost and travel just to make sure that gets done. Or do you wait till they come back and rework the plan? There's a lot of those little things that comes from working behind the scenes that a lot of people don't really take into consideration, I think, at times. Like, I know we hear the Monday night stuff about Vince tears up the script and everything like that, but think about how hands-on he's been for the past 30 plus years with that product, right? If it's not right in your head, if you're an artist and there's happy accidents, but if that happy accident is just smeared all over the canvas, you've got to get a new canvas, or you've got to rework what you've got on that canvas, right? So those are the things that, as an artist, as a producer, everybody's an artist. Everybody, it's that weird thing of people don't really. Graphic artists are hired to make the labels on your products that you buy every day, right? Coca-Cola hires a graphic artist to make sure that the cans look a certain way every few years, right? So it's appealing to the eyes of the audience and the consumer. Everybody has that artistic eye in them, and it's a matter of figuring it out. And then once you figured it out, it's realizing artistic compromise, right? Because you might really want to do this. Perfect example. I recently, as I had mentioned, had Waylon Barley and Shane Gibson shove me into a casket. Now, while part of that was pre-planned I knew they were coming to attack me, I did not know fully about the casket, let alone the fact that one of them would shove dirt on top of it. And this is another thing that we don't talk about a lot in professional wrestling, is mental health. I have PTSD, anxiety, depression, and a boatload of other things going on, right? So that was a trigger thing, right? I have very big dealings with that. So it was a whole mental thing of all right, I've got to get through this. And then once that's done, mentally check myself, make sure I'm okay, that I realize that this was not a real incident, that it wasn't anything to plague on my fears or anything like that, and then continue forward so that it doesn't hinder or anything like that. That doesn't mean I'm not going to get revenge, because trust me, revenge is already coming. I've already gotten my hands on Waylon Barley once. My good friend Tweedledee took care of him in his good home town of Defuniac Springs over at their 14th anniversary show. Unfortunately, tomorrow, Waylon wanted a rematch, but that's not going to happen due to some contract disputes. Unfortunately, I've been allowing Tweedle to appear in New Heights Wrestling under a brief little handshake deal, and his contract isn't signed. So I'm going to make sure that gets signed one way or another, either on the 12th, this Saturday, or on the 25th when we're at the Bulldog Bash in Freeport, Florida as well.
Now,
but
This has been a fun interview. We don't want to take up any more of your time.
Oh, I've got plenty of time. We haven't even started talking really about SXPW and Florida Gulf Coast. So, let's handle a little bit about that. Let's handle the rest of the interview, because I've talked about my home away from home. I've talked about a lot of things. Let's talk. I can gladly come back here and talk more. I've been enjoying this. But let's talk a little Southern Extreme Pro Wrestling, because they have a show coming up as well.
I was going to say, start telling us about Southern Extreme Pro Wrestling.
So recently, I'm not sure if you guys have seen this or not on social media, we have in few select McDonald's in the multiverse, these wonderful Southern Extreme Pro Wrestling, Florida Gulf Coast Wrestling Happy Meals that I've been gobbling up like no tomorrow. And there you'll see the official details for the show. It's on February 27th, in a few weeks from now. And it's going to be a huge show. I mean, it's a combining of two wondrous companies. Unfortunately, Florida Gulf Coast Wrestling recently stripped me of my tag team championship. I'm not too thrilled with that. As you can tell, the Florida indie scene and just wrestling in general can be a very frustrating and difficult thing to deal with at times, especially a princess of my caliber. So you got to roll with the punches. So we'll be rolling with the punches. Unfortunately, I had to reschedule the event from January to this February 27th event, and it's going to be a great show. We've got a lot of great matches that are going to be going on, title matches. It's going to be huge.
Now, how did you first become involved with Southern Extreme Pro Wrestling?
So my history with Southern Extreme Pro Wrestling goes back many years. I'm going to fix my Happy Meal box real quick, just because I'm on it. It's a lifelong dream to be on a Happy Meal box. But anyway.
That is pretty fucking cool, by the way. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's what happens when you travel the multiverse like a princess like myself can do. But I wound up getting involved with Southern Extreme Pro Wrestling many years ago. A good friend of mine named Jamel Fortune was looking for some spiritual guidance. So he had asked me to come in there and help him guide a new light to Southern Extreme Pro Wrestling as part of the Funhouse days of my career. Unfortunately, that didn't go over so well after being declared the Southern Extreme Battle Royal champion and making a deal with Billy McLeod on joining the Funhouse. The very next show, I learned you never trust a York and Donnie York Jr. when they proceeded to cane me and make me forfeit the title back to Billy. And that was the last time I was seen in SXPW until recently when they did Remember the Times, a Donnie York tribute. Donnie was left with no other options, as well as a few of the other owners, but they were in need of a new commissioner, and I happened to fill the role really quite nicely. And Donnie learned that night that he could, while you may never trust a York and you never make deals with devils you don't know, we learned that we had a mutual understanding of how things should be done. So since then, I've been running the show for Southern Extreme Pro Wrestling. And when I heard the opportunity of Florida Gulf Coast Wrestling coming in and stuff like that, I thought, what a better time to end a man's career. So we ended Pretty Boy Poppy's career at our last show, Clash of Titans. And then my title was taken from me, and there was a bit of a miscommunication of words with me and Hannibal Vachon and the rest of them. So I will be venturing forward as just the SXPW commissioner, but that's not to take away any dealings in my kingdom, as Cam Dashing, the King of Queens, will soon come to find out. I mean, how are you going to call yourself the King of Queens and you don't rock Adidas? I mean, there are already 3 Kings of Queens, and they already taught us Adidas is the way to go, right?
100%. And we saw your Adidas on that Clash of Titans show.
Yep, my Grand Courts, my black and whites.
Now, I've got
a few different pairs. I love my Adidas.
I have to pop out here, so thank you for joining us. But Dave is going to continue this because we first became familiar with you when doing commentary for Florida Gulf Coast Wrestling and all that Cerise is doing. So tell us how you got involved with them. And once again, thank you for joining us, Josh.
Thank you, Joe, for having me here. And Dave, I'll continue this conversation with you. Joe, hopefully you enjoy the playback a little bit later on and get to catch up in all this. But me and Hannibal Vachon go way back. We've known each other for quite some time, and he was in need of some spiritual guidance as well, as most of the individuals are when they come across my path. And we made some deals. He made a deal with me. I made a deal with him. And we jointly came to Florida Gulf Coast Wrestling with these same goals in mind. Unfortunately, those goals have now since changed, and so does sometimes happen. But I do wish him the best, and hopefully our paths do not cross again.
Josh, I'm going to ask you. I know we're talking about Gulf Coast and Extreme, but one thing I wanted to touch on before, you had talked about having a lot of stuff in your tool belt, which is super important. But also, too, like you met a lot of people. How important is the aspect of just networking and making these connections and relationships in the wrestling business?
So networking is very huge. If you're not an idiot, if you're not stupid, you'll eventually meet people who want to pay it forward, right? After you've been doing this for a long time and you gain some knowledge and you learn some things, the newer crop starts coming in. You know, every year there's a new generation of kids coming into professional wrestling that are training, right? So you want to, they're asking for advice. So you want to pay it forward. You want to give them advice. And I've always felt having all these different tools and different perspectives has always helped me in sometimes giving advice. And it's also helped me in learning advice, right? I might be able to come at me one way and I understand it from that perspective, but from this side of the coin, I wouldn't have understood it because that's how it's supposed to be on that side of things. Right. So it's learning overall how, if you love this business, if you really, you get what you put in to anything in life. And if you're positive about it and you want to do the work, right, you'll eventually see the returns. And those networking things, once again, that's networking, right? The first guy I met was James Legend from Brawl USA off of a post I made on a free comic book day wearing a t-shirt, right? So from that little bit of a connection, I was able to meet my next connection in professional wrestling in Simon Says, who really took me under his wing and taught me so much. And from there, I was also able to meet the man I just recently mentioned, Shooter Storm, who passed away, a boatload of others, including another man by the name of Puerto Rican Hound Dog, who also really hardcore took me under his wing and taught me a lot more of like the in-ring stuff, like just to be able to protect myself in there so I'm not getting murdered, like, and stuff like that. Because sometimes you need to know those things, right? The referees need to know it. Managers need to know when you make that transition to being hardcore in front of the camera. Because I originally started off as just an announcer, as a ring announcer, then commentator and backstage interviewer, and all those, pretty much those three roles wherever I could get in. And it was a lot of vintage wrestling where I was learning. And then, just through different connections, it became like, hey, we're having a show. Like I said, there's over 100 promotions in Florida. Eventually you will meet one of the people running those shows. And if you've impressed them, they will probably go, hey, I've got a show. I want to bring you out. And then you can start opening the dialogue of pay, right? Because that's why there's 100 different promotions, because everybody know your worth, right? There are some people that will go out there and work for free and they'll never learn anything new. And, they're content with that. And while that is their path in wrestling, that's not necessarily my path. That wasn't the path I wanted to choose. So I wanted to learn as much, do as much as I could.
Absolutely. That makes total sense. In that same vein, I guess, what has been some of the more challenging aspects? Because you have done so many different things.
Mental health is always the challenging thing, especially for me with obviously the list I have. Because sometimes that stuff will get to you, right? You'll get inside your own head on certain things because you want it to go one way and the higher ups don't see it that way, right? This is why wrestling is the way it is. Like, it is, everybody wants to be, like I said before, everybody wants to be the champion at the big show with the title and those dreams of grandeur when you're creating your wrestler on the video game or playing with your figures or whatever it may be, because that's what it was like for me when I was growing up as a kid. Never saw myself as the princess of weird Josh Johnson or Princess Josh. I saw myself as an entirely different thing, right? So, but this is where I stand today. This is the journey I've been on, and I love the journey I've been on. I wouldn't, those days where, like I said, the road that you travel, right? Francisco Chiazzo uses this phrase a lot, and it's, I'm probably going to butcher the quote, but the road is one giant dream wrapped in asphalt. So logistically, as a professional wrestler, as an entertainer, you're wanting to hit that road. Your dream is being on the road. It's not, it's, yes, it's being in front of the crowd, but it's also being on the road, right? Look at AEW. If you look at a lot of the backstage stuff, a lot of the guys will tell you, and you hear about how travel became entirely different the moment they started doing the weekly television, right? Because 1 week you're here, 1 week you're there, 1 week you're here, 1 week you're there. So that becomes very challenging, and you no longer control your schedule at that point, right? Because the higher ups are saying, we're going to Baltimore next week, and then the week after that, we're going to Cincinnati or whatever it may be, right? So when you're at this stage and my stage and, a little bit, you get to control your schedule, and hopefully you're making those bookings and, getting it so that your schedule is full, right? So you know exactly where you need to be. Those dates, once again, they're telling when to buy tickets for a show right now for the bigger companies, 3 months down the line, 4 months down the line, right? So that's where, to me, companies want to be getting to, is you want to be able to advertise a show 4 months down the line, selling out, starting to sell out on that one. And the 3 you have before it are selling damn near out, or if not sold out, right? So that it's always that progression. Some companies are happy with their little pond and others want to see more. So I've always been wanting to see more.
When you told us about a lot of the people you worked with and you got the pleasure of working with, but in terms of, a lot of people will say, okay, my biggest influence is Macho Man Randy Savage or this guy. But I feel like,
so I have an entirely different top 5 for that.
Okay, well, I'm curious. I'm
wondering what those influences would be for me.
Yeah, because I'm
also Insane Clown Posse, yeah. Bobby the Brain Heenan, David Arquette, and I'm probably missing a couple others off this list because I often think of this one and stuff. Gorilla Monsoon was another huge influence. Jesse the Body Ventura.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I obviously have my non-wrestling influences.
That's where I was going to go. That. I was kind of curious. What are some of your non-influences? Because I'm sensing, and I could be way off. There's some a little bit of Marvel stuff there. You're talking about the multiverse and stuff, and I'm super.
Well, let's be real. We stand in a new day and age where there's a multiverse for everything. There's a multiverse in the Ghostbusters world. There's a multiverse in the DC universe. There's a multiverse in the Halloween universe, right? The multiverse is a very real thing, and it's a very, very real thing if you know how to transgress it. So that is one of the, yes, I do love Marvel. Marvel helps enlighten the world into the multiverse, especially that wonderful show, Low Key. I mean, there's a lot of influences there. But being a chaos god like myself, I've been around for a very long time in a lot of different forms. I've taken a lot of different names. So names like Low Key, Bill Cipher, and so many more have run very true for an individual like myself. So yes, Gravity Falls, Low Key, horror movies. I love the slasher genre specifically. Not really I like some ghost movies. I like Dungeons and Dragons. I like fantasy. Music. I have had many influences in life, and I always, depending on what I'm doing and what hat or role I need to be in, is where I will come from some of those influences, right? Because some things that are good for me, right? Some of that multiversal talk and stuff like that, where I can talk low key and, all that Marvel stuff, right? That might resonate to somebody like you, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to a younger kid, they might understand the Gravity Falls stuff. And that's where I've kind of taken some stuff as well, obviously, because once again, it has been very well determined that myself, Bill Cipher, Low Key, and a few others have all been the same thing, but under different names. If you follow The Simpsons, in an episode they recently had. So there's a lot of heavy concepts that I like to play around with, and little ideas and little things here and there that I like to pay homage to at times, right? And that's just for me, but I like to do it with, obviously, we've discussed it. I work behind the scenes. I produce stuff. I, help with any role behind the scenes pretty much, except for physically paying and getting a show booked and everything like that. I'll help with pretty much everything else at this point in the stage. Just because I don't have that money or the means to do it yet doesn't mean I won't. just doesn't mean right now I don't want, it's not in the cards right now. But I do have wonderful places I work, like New Heights Wrestling, Southern Extreme Pro Wrestling, and a few others, and professional wrestling that I do have my hand in, that I get to work and feel creative in. Like I said, depending on who I'm working with, right? So if I'm working with a guy who is, there's a great talent down here named Leroy Shogun, right? I'm not going to go into the Marvel multiversal supervillain plethora of things when I'm producing a promo for him, right? That's not going to fit him. Maybe Luke Cage, if anything, of the big powerhouse kind of guy. But for him and his character, I'd go to something like The Last Dragon and Bruce Leroy and Sho'nuff and that influence, because obviously that is something that's played an influence on him in his life, and Wu-Tang Clan and hip hop and like that style, right? That's what I would be thinking of in the vein of trying to produce something for him, right? I look at it like Quentin Tarantino, Kevin Smith, and Robert Rodriguez. They're three of my favorite filmmakers, right? Look at their band of work and what they're creating, right? When Quentin Tarantino is writing a film, right? Because I'll go to Quentin first. Quentin writes a film, and the characters he's writing all that dialogue for every single individual on the screen, right? So he has to get into the mind of Samuel L. Jackson's character. He's got to get into the mind of the Leo character. He's got to get into the mind of this character, whatever other ones that it may be, right? Same with Kevin Smith, right? Jay and Silent Bob are the constant, right? He knows those two because that's just him and his buddy, right? But it's a little bit different when he's getting into the Randall role, because that's an old version of himself. It's different when he's doing stuff like with Becky, Dante's girlfriend from Clerks 2, right? Her dynamic and stuff like that. That's an entirely different character, in the way she acts. She feels natural to the world, but she's not, you want to be like, oh, she's like this character in the universe, or this, she's her own unique person and stuff. So that's sometimes where you've got to look at it, and sometimes those different influences. Look at James Gunn right now with Peacemaker, right? Mm-hmm. He allowed John Cena to take that piano playing thing that he's been doing in real life. Like, I don't know if you remember this. Cena did an interview on like either WWE or Total Divas or Total Bellers, one of those shows, where he was talking about starting playing the piano, right? And it was just maybe an hour a day he was talking about. And he started and he wasn't playing at all good. He was not good at the piano, right? Like anybody, when you first start something, you are horrible, right?
Sure.
But he went into the camera. He directly said, but I'm going to give this an hour a day. And if you do something for 1,000 hours, you've mastered it. Doesn't matter what the skill is, what the task is. You do something, the same thing for an hour a day for 1,000 hours, you're going to eventually master it. And here he is playing Home Sweet Home by Motley Crue on the piano in Peacemaker, right? So that just goes to show you with persistence and, keep yourself to me, I always look at individuals that have done things and are positive about it, especially at this stage in the game, right? Insane Clown Posse, I have mentioned them a few times. They're a huge influence on me. If I can ever get booked for JCW, it's a lifelong dream come true, right? I've been booked for the Gathering of the Juggalos and been Jump Steady's hype man, but not as a wrestler. So that's a whole nother avenue of my life that I've been a part of, right? So those influences, those things, right? Look at them nowadays and some of the podcast stuff and the Twitch stuff that they do. Listen to them talk, right? They atone for some of the past mistakes they made, some of the lyrics and some of the vile things that they may have said at the time, because that was the time period, right? People were just saying those things naturally. If they've apologized, Eminem's apologized, that's the thing you kind of do if you've evolved as a person, right? You realize your mistakes and you try to atone for them a little bit. Like, you can't change them, but you can change who you are right now. And listening to them and some of the things they talk about, right? They're two dudes from Detroit, Michigan with a little of a high school graduation. They dropped out of high school, right? Most of your favorite rappers from back in the day didn't have high school graduations, right? They dropped out and stuff. Some of them became multimillionaires, right? How come? Insane Clown Posse became millionaires. The most hated band in the world. There was literally an FBI most hated, a list of gangs, and the Juggalos got put on it for bullshit reason, right? Like, how a fan base can get put on. That's like the Star Wars fans or us wrestling fans getting put on a gang base, right? A whole thing that went into that. Anybody who's looking to look into it, really look into it. It's an interesting subject. But like, those two dudes went from wrestling in their backyards and rapping on karaoke machines to owning their own studios, owning their own wrestling company, working with every major person they've ever, legend in wrestling or music that they've ever wanted to, and have come complete full circle from the most hated band in the world to the most okay band in the world, right? Like, they're not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but now everybody's given them their respect, right? Everybody's kind of gone around and gone, all right, Insane Clown Posse, you've kind of done it. Like, you've ventured 30 plus years. You've done things that nobody else has done really in the game, right? Like, we hear about these certain rap labels. Like, remember in the 90s, 2000s, like, rap labels were everywhere, right? Psychopathic being one of them. Today is 2022. How many of them are still active functioning labels that are still putting out music? Death Row just got purchased by Snoop Dogg. Why? Because he wants to own the licensing rights to the music, not anything about producing new music for Death Row Records, right? Bad Boy, No Limit. How many other of these labels that have come out that aren't still putting out music the way that they used to and stuff like that? Because, they're used to, they're still trying to straggle on, but not to the numbers and to the degree of Insane Clown Posse and Psychopathic Records. That's that longevity stuff that I talk about. I'm like, I don't want necessarily to have the most famous career, but if I could have a long career and I do stuff and, like, get more out there and, get more people to appreciate my art as an artist, right? Because that's ultimately what we want in this entertainment industry, is to be appreciated as an artist. Look at David Arquette. I said he was a huge influence. That man went from being the world's heavyweight champion and never having to prove a damn thing to anyone. He didn't have to prove it to you. He didn't have to prove it to me. He didn't have to prove to anyone that he loved professional wrestling, right? But after the way fans treated him, after a call that, like, I like to use this one, who did more to hurt the pro wrestling business, David Arquette or Bret Hart? I'm asking you, who do you think?
I mean, that's an interesting.
It's an interesting question and an interesting perspective, right? Because the old school way, you were told keep kayfabe alive and do everything to protect the sanctity of the outcomes and the bookings, right? David Arquette was told, like Bill Goldberg was told, like everybody's told, you're winning the heavyweight title. He gave his 2 cents of, this isn't a good idea. These guys think it's not a good idea. Well, this is what we're doing. Bill Goldberg didn't think it was a good idea to get hit with a taser, but he still went out there and got hit with the taser. He did what the higher ups, what your bookers tells you to do, right?
Absolutely.
Bret Hart, in the same instance, was told the finish of what they wanted to do and fought it literally tooth and nail. And then when it didn't go his way, the very first thing he did was get on the phone the very next morning with the press and answer every single question they had about kayfabe, about the way the business was booked. Because he was salty at the time. He was hurt, But ultimately, that was the Pandora's box that got opened that day. Not David Arquette becoming the heavyweight champion, right? Realistically, who did David Arquette pin to win the World Heavyweight Championship?
Oh, Eric Bischoff.
Eric Bischoff. Did he pin he didn't pin an actual wrestler. The stipulation of the match was whoever scored the pinfall would be heavyweight champion.
Right.
So that's no different than if Layla or Michelle McCool and The Undertaker were fighting Triple H and Stephanie or Michelle McCool won the heavyweight title.
Right.
You'd be more okay with that because they're trained wrestlers, this, that, and the other. They've been around. You're used to them being in the professional wrestling scene, right? The other one of my other big ones, and I can't believe I forgot, is Andy Kaufman. Because I look at David Arquette as a modern day Andy Kaufman, right? Is Andy Kaufman loved the professional wrestling industry so much. Everything he did, he never cashed checks for it. He still had uncashed checks on the day he died from professional wrestling, right? Because he did it because he loved wrestling. Didn't do it for any other reason. David Arquette was the same thing. He went back to pro wrestling to kind of prove to everyday fans of, like, look, put some little bit of respect on me here of, like, and look at the conversation now. We look at David Arquette in a whole different light now, right? Because he was willing to, it was one thing that he went out there and did wrestling, and it was another thing to go into the match with Nick Gage. That is what, and then it was another thing for Dark Side of the Ring and him to do the documentary that he was doing at the same time, because ultimately he was doing the documentary at the same time, because ultimately that was his goal in the documentary. He knew at the end of it all, like everything he was going through, that end of the documentary was going to be his shining light to the pro wrestling world, his love letter to us. And we took that love letter and, now we are like, all right, we're not really thrilled. A lot of normal people are like, we're not thrilled with them winning the heavyweight title, but we understand now, right? You should have understand back then. Like, I
get it. Yeah.
And it's like Freddie Prinze Jr., right? Now we're starting to respect Freddie Prinze Jr. because he's starting to dish out all the dirt on all the stuff that goes on backstage. And then when you hear his ideas, you're like, oh, wait a minute, that was infinitely better an idea than what they put out. Well, that's professional wrestling. Everybody's got ideas. Ultimately, the buck has to stop somewhere with the booker, the promoter, or somebody who's making the final calls on things, because it's their product. They're the one paying you as an artist to perform, right? So that comes down to all of that of like, yeah, things don't always go your way because you might want to see it go one way. Somebody might, the booker might see it go the other way. You've got to do what the booker says. You might not be happy of it, but that's the direction you've got to go. If you're smart in this business, you do, you need to do, you make it work the best you can, and then you go to the next one and make that work. And if you do your job right, you resonate with a crowd. Look, because I've had to give this advice too, right? To some of the younger guys, they'd be like, well, I had to work a multi-man match and I didn't get nearly enough of my moves in, so I don't feel like I got over enough with the crowd. Well, that's not because of how many moves you did. That's because of how much work you did in the ring, right? I don't do a single move, right? Not a single move beyond a poke to the eye on the outside as a managerial spot and maybe a punch as a managerial spot, right? I don't do any moves. I'm not a wrestler, right? I have t-shirts. I have merchandise, right? I'm sitting here talking to you. Yeah. Obviously, I've done something to resonate with a crowd without having to do a single move. So as a wrestler, sometimes you need to figure out, they always say it's paint by numbers till you figure it out and then you're able to do it, right? Well, what's that mean? If you look at paint by numbers, right? Yeah, you're taking the red and red goes on 1, blue goes on 2, right? But when you know what you're doing, you're able to take a little bit of red in the number 1 spot, a little bit of white. Now there's this nice shading effect that's going on, right? And then you're taking the blues and the blacks and you're making it really look like a night scene on the top. It's paint by numbers. Paint by numbers. But as an artist, the more you learn, the more techniques you learn, that's where you're now getting to create, look at literally paint by numbers people, right? People, artists who take the paint by numbers set. It's YouTube, it's modern day. I'm pretty sure there's thousands of videos on YouTube where a doodle does take a paint by number set right out the fresh package using what they have, and then he'll create this amazing piece of art outside of the realm of the paint by numbers by doing his own artistic view on it, right? That's professional wrestling as well. You learn the basics, and once you've got the basics down, you continue on. Now, it takes a lot of people a long time to realize some of those basics and stuff, right? And as fans, we are always intrigued by that, right? We want to learn more. We always want to figure out those little intricacies because we want to be on the inside, ultimately. We want to, as a fan, we want to be the Bray Wyatts, the Steve Austins, the Triple H's, the Shawn Michaels, the Undertakers, whatever it may be, whoever tickles your fancy in professional wrestling, right? As screwed up as it is, right? It's 2022, and there are still people who wish to emulate the in-ring style of Chris Benoit, right? Right. And indie wrestling shows and throughout the United States, and even as fans, you'll still hear the conversation of, all right, minus the fact that he killed his whole family. He's an amazing wrestler, right? Yeah. Which is true to a degree, because you can't take away from the artist, right? Picasso, Edgar Allan Poe used to fuck his cousin, right? Excuse my language here and all that. I try, but it's true. I'm a huge Edgar Allan Poe fan. He married his cousin. If you heard today, in today's day and age, that Stephanie Meyer, the writer of Twilight, married her first cousin, instantly there'd be a whole backlash against Twilight books, right? Because that's wrong. But Edgar Allan Poe did it, and we consider him one of the greatest prolific authors of time. Yeah. Time changes things and perspective changes things on a lot of things, right? And if you are a great artist, your work will inevitably speak out more than the horrible acts you may have committed. Yes, you still have taken those, and we still need to talk about those atrocities, right? But with that being said, that doesn't, they may have come up with a new technique that somebody else didn't come up with. So we have to talk about them, right? Because they were the inventor of the technique. You can't change history. You can rewrite history, but ultimately history is what it is. Truth always inevitably finds its way to the light. Look at Batman. Who created Batman?
I don't know who the creator of Batman was. You got me.
You don't know?
I do not.
If you look at a comic book right now, right? Look at any old Batman comic. It'll say one thing. And if you have Batman Gotham Knights, look at this too. There's an entire documentary on it, right? Bob Kane, the creator of Batman, right? Bob Kane's not the creator of Batman. He's the co-creator of Batman. There's another documentary that came out, and it took years of the family of Bill Finger fighting to get him recognition, and had to sue DC Comics just to get his name on his property that he created. Because for the longest time, his family was given this burden of, yeah, my dad helped Bob Kane create Batman. No, he didn't. Bob Kane created Batman. He did it by himself. That's what this DVD tells me. That's what Bob Kane tells me. That's what his book tells me. And yeah, because Bob Kane was a fucking liar, and he redacted history as long as he could until history found its way to get those things out. Like, we're still discovering things from ancient civilization past, right? Old dinosaur bones, new archaeological discoveries are being made every fucking day that most John Q. public doesn't realize, right? But it changes the narrative of the way history is, right? I just started watching the show Vikings recently, and not a lot is known about Ragnar. One of the main characters, at least in the first season where I'm starting off, not a lot's known about the guy, right? In actual normal history, right? He's almost at that level of mythic, of like, was he real? Was he not? In certain instances that becomes a whole nother thing, right? But here it becomes that whole, well, this is how it was written. This is what we've found in history so far, right? But if they were to uncover in like France or something, one of the areas that he invaded and stuff, a whole new document that like literally was written by him detailing his battle strategy that was lost to time, that changes the narrative of everything now, right? We now have to address that, and especially with canon and stuff. Like, we're comic book fans, canon's always the big thing. Oh, it's not a canon, they're retconning, they're doing this, that, and the other. Sometimes we're not given all the information that we need to know because it's not pertinent to the story right now, right? Because if I'm telling you the story of my life, I still haven't touched on my childhood, my teenage years, so many other companies I've worked for. There's so many things. We do another interview, you're going to find out more. Am I retconning my backstory, or am I just letting you in on a little bit more? Sometimes, especially in filmmaking and stuff like that, yeah, they screw up the pooch a little bit more, right? Not to horribly ruin things for people who haven't seen the new Scream movie. Being a huge Scream fan, I love the Stab franchise. That was one of the big driving forces for me. In the new movie, they make a little bit of a continuity era with the Stab franchises, right? There's a whole thing in the Stab or Scream 4 that Sidney Prescott, the character, was in the first 3 movies, and then she wasn't in any more. In the new Scream movie, written by new people, directed by new people, and while it is a love letter to the original 4 movies, that's a small detail in one line of dialogue that they missed, right? That I remember, but they don't. So in their movie, somehow Sidney Prescott was in every Stab movie. How is that so? If she was in the 2 contradicting things. That's where I can understand people bickering over canon and stuff like that. But history isn't canon. It's fact to a degree, right? It's lenticular, as much as we like to think of it as a lenticular line, it isn't. It's an ever looping thing of multiverses and everything like that. But yeah, it is what it is.
Josh, you're a fascinating guy, and I feel like we should have a little more time for you. But I'll tell you what, why don't you just, we'll wrap this up with 2 things. Tell me what some of your goals are coming up, and then tell me anything you want to talk about coming up, any shows, promote, whatever you want, man. What's yours?
Goals have always been and will always remain the same. Once again, not only longevity, but for the supreme domination of your supreme leader of Cerise, the princess of Weird They Selves, to not only infiltrate the multiverses of Florida, but hopefully some of the multiverses that you have up there, up in the Northeast, some that are out in California, maybe some around the world. I want to be everywhere I can physically be, and hopefully be able to entertain the masses along the way with my brand of entertainment. Far as shows and everything like that, you can follow me on all forms of social media at Princess Weird 17, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Tomorrow night in Vernon, Florida, I believe at the Vernon Community Center, New Heights Wrestling, Bound to Determine 2022. Tag team titles on the line. Odin's Guard, my personal hoorah guys here. I'm so excited. We've been going at this for 2 years. We've had this plan. I gave Sanson a gift 2 years ago when he was reluctant to join me. This time I'm going to give him the gift of the tag team titles. Him and Frederick Yeager. We're taking on Preston Veston and Ryan Holland, and we're going to war. It's victory or Valhalla, because if we don't win, you're probably not going to see us again. Be real. We're going for war. We're going all out. Then February 25th, once we've acquired those titles, we will be defending those titles in Freeport, Florida, once again for New Heights Wrestling, for the Bulldog Bash at the Freeport Gymnasium, their high school gymnasium over there. Tickets are available at the door. Visit New Heights Wrestling or facebook.com/New Heights Wrestling for more information on them. Southern Extreme Pro Wrestling and Florida Gulf Coast Wrestling, February 27th, I believe, is on the box. I'm horrible with dates at times. Yes, February 27th, 2022. There is all the wonderful info for that one. It will be a joint show. It's called Tensions Rising. I will be the commissioner in charge, and I have a very special opponent in mind for the so-called King of Queens, Cam Dashing, and his miserable shrew of a hag, Miss Lilith. After that, I have a boatload of other things coming up. I have a bodybuilding competition I'll be hosting in the future. I have other shows that I'll be doing. Fright Nights will once again be going on this year in the year of 2022, and I will be returning as the host of that, as well as New Heights Wrestling. So a lot of things on my plate, as well as things I can't even talk about yet. So yeah, please follow me at Princess Weird 17.
My man, that's what I was going to ask. Social media, my man. All right, Josh, it is a pleasure. We will definitely have you back, because I feel like we've only scratched the surface. Thank you, sir.
Have a good one.